Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going somewhere that's been in the news a lot lately for some pretty tough reasons.
Yeah, a region that's really seen its share of turmoil.
Exactly. We're talking about Manipur. It's a state in northeast India, and I think for a lot of folks it's probably a place they don't know a whole lot about. But the stories coming out of there are just really heavy, really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a place with a really unique history and culture. It kind of gets overlooked sometimes when we talk about India as a whole.
That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive. We really want to try to understand the human side of this conflict.
Right.
What's led to these really, really deep divisions. And can peace ever be possible? I mean, can it?
And to really get into it, we're going to be looking at this in-depth report. It's called Peace Eludes Manipur, State Apathy Towards the Ongoing Conflict.
Okay.
And it's a fact-finding report put together by Irfan Engineer and Neha Dapade. They're from the Center for Study of Society and Secularism, and they actually went to Manipur, did a ton of interviews with people from all sides of the conflict, Meitei, Kuki, Naga. So we're getting a pretty complete picture here.
Yeah, that's so important to hear from all the different perspectives.
Exactly.
And to really underscore how serious this situation is, the preface to the report was written by Harsh Mander.
Oh, wow.
He's a pretty prominent human rights activist in India.
Yeah.
So yeah, get ready to kind of go on this journey with us through history, through politics, and this clash of identities that has just left Manipur deeply scarred.
Yeah. To really understand what's going on, we got to start with the history. I mean, Manipur wasn't always a part of India. It was an independent kingdom for centuries.
Wow.
They had their own royal chronicles called the Kitharal Kumbaba. And get this, it dates back to 33 AD.
That's almost 2,000 years of history as an independent kingdom.
Exactly. And even their own indigenous faith called Sanamahism.
Oh, wow. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah, so Hinduism was actually introduced later.
Okay.
And it wasn't always a peaceful introduction either.
Really?
The report actually talks about this king, King Pomheba. He was around in the 18th century. And he was really pushing for people to adopt Hinduism. Sometimes he forced it, so that's some baggage right there. It still affects how different communities in Manipur see each other.
So it's like layers of history are contributing to the tension.
Totally.
And then, of course, you have the British colonization period. Manipur became a protectorate, then a princely state, and finally in 1949 it merges with India. But this is where things get really interesting.
Yeah, the merger was a really controversial thing. You had a lot of Manipurists across different ethnic groups who felt like their right to self-determination was just ignored.
Yeah, like they didn't have a choice in the matter.
Exactly, and that feeling has never really gone away, like a wound that never healed.
And it's even more striking when you realize that right before the merger, Manipur was actually a democratic constitutional monarchy. Yeah, it was the first one in Asia. They had their own legislature, and even they opposed the merger. So you can see why this feeling of being forced into India still resonates today, especially for the Kuki and Naga communities.
Makes sense. And this resentment really feeds into the current conflict.
How so?
Well, you have the Meitei community, mostly concentrated in the Imphal Valley, which, by the way, only represents 10% of the land.
Wow, that's small.
Yeah, so they see themselves as the original inhabitants of Manipur. And they resent not being able to own land in the hills.
Which is where the demand for scheduled tribe status comes in.
Exactly. They believe that getting ST status would give them the right to buy land in the hills, which right now is mainly occupied by the Kukis and Nagas.
So I can see how that would create tension.
Yeah, for the Kukis, it's a pretty terrifying idea.
Yeah, I bet.
They already feel like the Meitei are the dominant group, and they're afraid of being marginalized, losing their land, losing their voice.
There's a lot to be fearful of.
And then, on top of all of that, you have this whole other layer of complexity. The narrative about Kukis being illegal immigrants from Myanmar.
Right, I've heard that.
So that's a major source of tension. The Meitei point to the increasing number of Kuki villages, and they're saying, look, this is proof, and they want a national register of citizens, like the one in Assam, to identify and potentially expel these illegal Kukis.
Oh, basically to determine who belongs and who doesn't.
Right.
But the Kukis completely deny that there's this large-scale immigration. They say the new villages are just a natural result of their traditional way of life. They practice shifting agriculture, families grow, they need more space. It makes sense.
Yeah, and for them, this demand for an NRC feels like an attack.
Like they're trying to erase them.
Exactly, and take away their rights.
It's important to say here that the report doesn't take sides on this immigration issue.
Oh, definitely not.
It presents both perspectives and really highlights that there's no clear evidence. And that using this narrative can be really dangerous because it just creates more division and distrust.
For sure.
So we have this backdrop of complex history, these simmering land disputes, conflicting narratives, and then the violence that erupted in May 2023.
Right.
How did things escalate to that point?
Well, the report points to some specific actions that the BJP government took. They really inflamed the situation.
What kind of actions?
One of the big triggers was this crackdown on poppy cultivation. It was happening mainly in Kuki areas, and it was framed as this fight against drugs. But the Kukis felt like they were being singled out, while the big players in the drug trade were getting away with it.
That would definitely create resentment.
Yeah. And the report even mentions this former police officer, Brinda Thunajam. She actually accuses the chief minister of being personally involved in the drug trade.
Whoa.
Now, the authors of the report say they couldn't independently verify this, but it just adds to the suspicion.
Right. Even if it's just a rumor, it shows the level of mistrust.
Exactly. And then you have the forced evictions of Kukis from their villages. Officially, it was because they were encroaching on reserved forest land, but the Kukis saw it as a land grab, pure and simple.
It's not hard to see why they would feel that way.
Right, and the government was also making plans to declare certain areas as heritage sites. So you can see why the Kukis were worried about their land and way of life being taken away.
Yeah, it seems like a lot was happening all at once.
Yeah.
And then the government pulled out of the suspension of operations agreement.
Oh, right, a SO agreement.
That was with the Kuki militant groups. And it had been in place for years, so pulling out felt like a real betrayal.
Oh, yeah, it definitely escalated tensions. So you have the Meitei demanding ST status in the NRC, the Kukis afraid of losing their land and feeling marginalized, and then the government doing all these things that the Kuki community sees as hostile. So it was basically a powder keg.
And then the All-Tribal Students Union of Manipur organized that rally on May 3rd. And that's when things really exploded.
Yeah.
So this rally is the flashpoint.
Yeah, there are conflicting stories about how the violence actually started.
Okay.
Like the Meitei claim the rally is what set it off. They say the Kukis attacked this Anglo-Kuki war memorial and targeted Meitei who were living in the hills.
I see. What about from the Kukis? What's their side of the story?
The Kukis are saying that the rally was totally peaceful, and they're claiming that the Manhei attacked the memorial later that day, which is what provoked them to retaliate.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like a he said, she said thing.
Yeah.
But I guess no matter who started it, it's clear that Manipur just descended into chaos.
Oh, yeah. And fast.
Mobs on both sides, just rampaging. Homes, businesses, places of worship. It's just horrific.
And like we see in a lot of ethnic conflicts, unfortunately, women became targets.
It's just awful.
Yeah. The report has accounts of sexual assault, rape, Kuki women being paraded naked, just unimaginable atrocities. It's really hard to even read about.
It's just devastating.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just random acts of violence either, right?
Right.
The report kind of hints that there was some organization behind it, especially on the Meitei side.
Yeah, there are these groups, like the Arambai Tengal and Meitei Pun. And they seem to have had some support from the state, almost acting like militias, inciting attacks and carrying them out.
That's really disturbing.
It is. And the report even mentions that Arambai Tengal members were seen marking Kuki houses in Imphal months before the violence.
So they were planning it.
That's what it looks like.
Wow. And then there's that whole thing with the state armory.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Thousands of weapons were looted.
I know.
How does something like that even happen?
That's what the report is trying to figure out. It seems like either the authorities knew about it and did nothing, or they were somehow involved.
Either way, it's not a good look.
Not at all.
So after all of this, what's the situation in Manipur right now?
I mean, it's bleak. We're talking about 70,000 people displaced, living in these relief camps that are overcrowded and don't have enough resources, and whole communities have been ethnically cleansed. The report describes Manipur as a fractured state. With all these borders and checkpoints within Manipur itself, it's wild.
Manipur is divided against itself, literally.
Yeah.
The researchers who wrote this report, they actually went there.
It did. And they talk about their trip, going from Imphal to Churchanpur and passing through 7 heavily armed checkpoints. They had to go through more security to travel within Manipur than they ever did going to other countries.
It shows how deep this division runs.
Totally. They even had to get a police escort at one point and pay a toll at a checkpoint that was manned by Kuki women.
Wow.
So, beyond all the logistical stuff, the report really drives home the human cost. They talk to people who lost everything, women who saw horrible things, mothers who were just trying to feed their kids, students who can't go to school anymore.
It's a lot to process. And it makes you wonder what happens next.
Yeah.
Is there any hope for peace, or are the two sides too dug in at this point?
That's the tough question. Both communities have been through so much, but they seem to want such different things. The Meitei want to keep Manipur unified, but they also want ST status so they can buy land in the hills. They still want that National Register of Citizens to find and get rid of what they see as illegal Kukis. And they want the border with Myanmar fenced off so no one else can come in.
It sounds like they want control of the land, of who belongs there, of the whole story.
I mean, yeah, that's one way to see it.
And they want the Assam rifles out.
Right. They see them as being pro-Kuki.
And replaced with Manipur police.
Yeah.
And of course, they want all the displaced Meitei to be able to go back to their homes in the hills.
Of course.
So what about the Kukis? What are they asking for?
They have zero trust in the Bjornsing government.
Makes sense.
They want a separate administration for the hill areas. Basically separation from the valley.
So two completely separate entities.
Pretty much.
And what about the NRC and that border fence?
They're totally against both. They
Yeah.
see it as a way to erase them, marginalize them. It's like a total deadlock. No common ground, two different languages.
And we can't forget about the Nagas. They're a big part of Manipur, too. Where do they stand in all of this?
Yeah, that adds a whole other layer. They're not really directly involved in the Meitei Kuki conflict, but they want their own independent Nagalim, a homeland for Nagas across several states. So they're kind of walking a tightrope here, wary of both the Meitei and the Kuki demands.
So they have their own thing going on.
Exactly. They're against a separate administration for the Kukis.
Because it would mean losing territory?
Yep. Territory they think should be part of Nagalim, but they also don't want the Meitei to get ST status.
Because it would mean the Meitei could start taking their land.
Right. So they're pushing for power sharing and decentralization and development for the hill areas. They're trying to find a different way.
It doesn't sound like there are any easy answers here. What does the report say about the possibility of peace? Is there any hope at all?
It does talk about some people from civil society, people who are desperate for a way out of this, and they're calling for truth and reconciliation, where both communities can talk about what happened, acknowledge the pain and suffering on both sides, and try to understand each other's perspectives.
So basically, create a space for dialogue.
Exactly. It's about trying to move past the blame, the need for revenge.
It's about understanding.
Yeah. And the report also says that justice is really important. There can't be any real peace if they don't address what happened, the violence.
So holding the perpetrators accountable.
Exactly. No matter who they are or what side they're on, they need to investigate. And people need to face consequences to show that this kind of violence won't be tolerated. And of course, disarmament is huge. As long as there are all these armed groups running around, peace will be impossible.
It's disarming these militias, figuring out what caused them to form in the first place, and then finding a way to bring those fighters back into society. It's a huge task.
Oh, it is. But they have to address these issues or peace is never going to happen.
And it always comes back to that same question.
About whether they can all live together.
Yeah. Can those different communities ever really see Manipur as a place they share? Can they get past the divisions, the ethnic and religious differences?
That's the million-dollar question, and the report says it's going to be really hard.
But it's not impossible.
Right. There's still hope. Like all those acts of kindness we talked about earlier, those moments when people chose to help each other. That shows that it's possible.
Yeah, it's those little acts of kindness that remind us there's still humanity there. Even when there's so much violence, it gives me hope that things could change.
Yeah. It's like they're saying, look, Manipur is a homeland for everyone, no matter what ethnicity they are or what religion. Everyone has the right to live there in peace, with dignity.
It's a powerful thought. But right now it feels really fragile, knowing everything that's going on.
It is. The report is realistic. It knows that getting to peace will take a long time, and it'll be hard.
So where do you even start? What can people do?
Well, the report has some suggestions. One big thing is setting up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Okay, I've heard of those.
Yeah, it's basically a place where people can talk about what happened from all sides, acknowledge the pain, and try to understand each other.
So you're moving away from blame and revenge.
Right. It's about understanding. And the report also says that justice is super important. They can't just ignore the violence that happened.
So people need to be held accountable.
Yeah, they need to investigate. And if people are found guilty, They need to face consequences, no matter who they are, which side they're on. It's about sending a message that this kind of violence won't be tolerated. And of course they talk about disarmament. As long as those armed groups are out there, peace is going to be impossible.
So, disarming the militias, and then figuring out how they got started in the first place. And what about the fighters?
Yeah, they talk about reintegration. Bring them back into society. But it's complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. But they have to do something right, or nothing will change.
I mean, yeah, they have to address the root causes. Or what's the point?
And it all comes back to that question we keep asking.
About whether they can live together peacefully.
Can all those different communities see Manipur as a shared homeland? Can they move past all those divisions?
That's the million-dollar question. And the report is honest. It's not going to be easy.
But it's not impossible either.
Right. There's still hope. They point to those stories of kindness, where people from different sides helped each other. It shows that it's possible to connect.
It's those little glimmers of humanity. Even in the darkest times, it makes you think that maybe a shared future isn't so out of reach.
Exactly. But it's going to take a big change. People have to be willing to see each other as human beings and understand that a shared future only works if everyone feels safe, respected, valued.
This has been a really heavy, deep dive. I mean, we've talked about a lot of pain, anger, despair. But we've also seen those sparks of hope, those little reminders that peace is worth fighting for, even if it feels impossible.
And for you listening, think about this. What can you do to promote understanding? Empathy. How can you challenge those narratives of hate and division that we see everywhere? It starts with each of us.
It's a call to action, to engage with these tough issues, to listen to the people who are being silenced, to create a world where peace isn't just a dream, but a reality. Thanks for joining us on this journey to Manipur. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for those connections that bring us together.